In August 2025, the world watched with bated breath as US President Donald Trump made a move that would send shockwaves through the global economy. In a surprise announcement, he doubled tariffs on Indian imports, raising them to a staggering 50%, an unprecedented leap that caught both markets and policymakers off guard. This was not a minor tweak in policy, it was a seismic rupture in US-India relations, threatening to unravel decades of painstaking economic and diplomatic progress. The trust that had been built over years of negotiation and cooperation now seemed to hang by a thread. The escalation was swift and dramatic. First, a 25% tariff was imposed, sending shockwaves through boardrooms and trading floors alike. Then, within days, an executive order doubled it, leaving little time for businesses or governments to react. Indian policymakers and exporters were left reeling, scrambling to formulate a response to an unpredictable White House. The sense of uncertainty was palpable, as leaders in New Delhi convened emergency meetings to assess the fallout and chart a path forward. The tariff signaled a dramatic shift away from the rules-based trade system that had governed global commerce for decades. Instead, a more confrontational, transactional era was dawning, one where power politics and brinkmanship threatened to overshadow cooperation. For India, the 50% tariff was more than just an economic blow, it was a wake-up call. The country was forced to reassess not only its economic strategy, but also its broader relationship with the United States. Financial markets plunged, the rupee tumbled to new lows, and Indian businesses, from small manufacturers to large conglomerates, faced the grim prospect of being priced out of their largest and most lucrative export market. Factories slowed production, and the ripple effects were felt across supply chains and communities. The shock underscored just how deeply economic security is intertwined with global politics. It became clear that trade policy could no longer be separated from questions of national security and international alliances. For India, the challenge was clear and urgent. Protect its interests and sovereignty without being drawn into a destructive trade war that could have far-reaching consequences for its economy and its people. Around the world, governments and analysts realized this was more than a simple trade spat. It was a test of alliances and influence in a rapidly changing global order. The stakes were higher than ever, and the outcome uncertain. The US-India partnership, once seen as a pillar of stability in an unpredictable world, now stood on the brink of a historic rupture. The sense of loss was profound, as both nations weighed the costs of confrontation against the benefits of cooperation. The question now loomed large: could either side truly afford the cost of escalation, or would cooler heads prevail to write a new chapter in this vital relationship? The White House justified the tariffs by citing India's continued purchases of discounted Russian oil, claiming it undermined Western efforts against Moscow. The move was framed as both economic punishment and geopolitical pressure, aiming to force India to realign its foreign policy. Long-standing US complaints about Indian trade barriers and intellectual property rights resurfaced, but many saw these as pretexts. Critics noted the hypocrisy. Other US allies also bought Russian energy but faced no such penalties. The selective enforcement made the US rationale appear arbitrary and targeted. In India and beyond, the tariffs were seen less as principled policy and more as a coercive tactic. The episode exposed the fragility of trust in global trade rules. New Delhi's response was swift, resolute, and unmistakably defiant. Within hours of the US announcement, top Indian officials convened in emergency meetings, determined to craft a strategy that would not only address the immediate challenge, but also send a clear message to the world. Prime Minister Modi's government publicly condemned the tariffs as unfair and unjustified, calling them a violation of the principles of international trade. Refusing to bow to US pressure, Indian negotiators stood their ground in tense discussions, making it clear that India would not be coerced into compliance. India highlighted the selective and discriminatory nature of the US action, arguing that it undermined the spirit of global cooperation. Indian officials pointed out that several other countries continued trading with Russia, yet only India was being singled out for penalties, raising questions about the true motives behind the move. In a bold countermeasure, the government paused planned US defense purchases, signaling that India would not hesitate to leverage its own economic power. Simultaneously, Indian trade officials began a comprehensive review of all ongoing and future trade offers, making it clear that any economic pain would be shared, not one-sided. The message was unmistakable. India would not accept terms that threatened its interests, and any attempt at economic coercion would be met with equal resolve. For India, this was about more than just economics. It was a defense of its strategic autonomy, its right to make independent decisions, and its evolving global identity as a confident, sovereign nation. The tariffs were widely seen as a direct challenge to India's doctrine of multi-alignment, a cornerstone of its foreign policy that values diverse partnerships over exclusive alliances. India made it clear, no matter how powerful the partner, its foreign policy would not be dictated by external pressure or threats. The world watched closely as India asserted itself as an equal on the global stage, not a subordinate to any superpower. The message was clear and unwavering. India would not be bullied into submission, and its voice would be heard with dignity and strength. The tariff escalation followed the collapse of months-long trade talks. Both sides had made significant offers. India on industrial goods and energy purchases, the US on market access for agriculture and tech. But deep divides over agriculture and skilled worker visas proved insurmountable. Indian negotiators underestimated Washington's willingness to risk the partnership for domestic politics. The situation worsened after President Trump's controversial remarks on India-Pakistan, souring the atmosphere. The talks failed, and the tariffs followed, a perfect storm of miscalculation and political posturing. The fallout, a promising partnership derailed by intractable disagreements. The stage was set for a full-blown trade war. The 50% tariff hit Indian industries hard, especially textiles, apparel, marine products, and leather goods. Exporters faced canceled orders and supply chain chaos as their products became uncompetitive in the US. Financial markets tumbled, the rupee weakened, and inflation fears grew. For millions of workers in labor-intensive sectors, the tariffs threatened jobs and livelihoods. Businesses scrambled to absorb costs, pass them to US buyers, or find new markets, none of which offered quick relief. The human cost was immediate layoffs, factory shutdowns, and rising poverty. The trade war's impact was not abstract, it was felt in the lives of ordinary people. The crisis exposed the deep links between global policy and everyday survival. The tariffs backfired, hurting US consumers and businesses as well. American healthcare costs soared as Indian generics became pricier, straining the system. US tech firms reliant on Indian IT services faced uncertainty and potential retaliation. Manufacturers dependent on Indian inputs saw costs spike and supply chains disrupted. The tariffs, meant to protect US jobs, risked making American companies less competitive. In a globalized world, economic pain is never one-sided. The lesson: trade wars inflict mutual damage, not victory. The world condemned the US tariffs as reckless and self-defeating. Economists like Steve Hanke called the policy rubbish, warning it would hurt the US as much as India. Russia and China denounced the move as illegal and a violation of international norms. The tariffs were seen as part of a broader pattern of US unilateralism, undermining global rules. International criticism bolstered India's position, isolating the US diplomatically. The dispute became a test of whether one nation could impose its will on others outside established frameworks. For many, the episode was a warning about the costs of abandoning multilateralism. Even superpowers, it seemed, could pay a steep reputational price. India responded by accelerating its pivot toward alternative alliances, especially the expanded BRICS Plus bloc. This strategic shift was not just a reaction but a proactive measure to secure its economic future. By engaging more deeply with BRICS Plus, India aimed to create a more balanced and multipolar world order. The trade war pushed India to deepen ties with non-Western partners and reduce reliance on the US dollar. This move was crucial for India to safeguard its economic interests and ensure stability in its financial systems. By diversifying its trade partnerships, India aimed to mitigate risks associated with overdependence on any single economy. Settling trade in local currencies with Russia and others became a priority, insulating India from US financial pressure. This approach not only strengthened bilateral relations, but also promoted the use of local currencies in international trade, reducing the dominance of the US dollar. India's global leverage, its role in supply chains, pharmaceuticals and tech, gave it new bargaining power. The country's robust pharmaceutical industry and its growing IT sector positioned it as a critical player on the global stage, enhancing its negotiating power in international forums. The crisis spurred efforts to find new markets, boost domestic manufacturing, and diversify alliances. This period of economic turbulence became a catalyst for India to innovate and expand its industrial base, ensuring long-term economic resilience. The future remains uncertain, but India is signaling it's ready for the long haul. With a clear vision and strategic partnerships, India is preparing to navigate the complexities of the global economy, aiming for sustainable growth and development. The US must now decide, double down on protectionism, or seek a new balance. This decision will have far-reaching implications not just for the US, but for global trade dynamics and international relations. For India, the path forward is about resilience, autonomy, and shaping its own destiny. By focusing on self-reliance and strategic global partnerships, India is charting a course towards a more secure and prosperous future.